the last time you felt like you may have overreacted a little bit to something? If you have ADHD, probably wasn't that long ago. A lot of people with ADHD have difficulty with emotional regulation. It's not part of the DSM-5's definition though. So I just want to talk a little bit about that first. So the DSM is what we in the United States, or psychologists in the United States, use as their diagnostic criteria. And back in the 60s, when they first started talking about ADHD and developing ideas and really seeing what was going on and starting to identify it, they recognized emotional dysregulation as part of ADHD, as an important component to it. But when it came to putting it in the definition for the DSM, from then on, so for about 50 years, we have pretty much ignored that aspect when it comes to the technical definition of ADHD. Why, you wonder? If it's a component of ADHD, why is it not listed? Well, the problem is it's very difficult to measure emotional regulation. You can't measure emotions. So we can say, based on empirical evidence and those types of things, that people with ADHD tend to feel higher highs and lower lows and more intense feelings, but there's really no way to measure that. So it's kind of a weird little blanket statement, although if you take a group of people who've been diagnosed with ADHD and you ask them if they have problems with their emotional regulation, about 70% of them would say yes. But recently, within the last 15 years, it's starting to be talked about again more. And Europe has even added it to their definition, their version of the DSM. I don't know that it'll ever be added to ours because of the measurability and the quantification issues that are surrounding it. Either way, it's a pretty fair statement to say a lot of people with ADHD have a difficult time regulating their emotions. All that being said, I want to talk about something that's called Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria. And if you haven't heard of it, it's usually referred to as RSD. So RSD is a form of emotional dysregulation that a lot of people with ADHD suffer from. It too is not in the DSM because it's all around emotions, and they avoid that kind of stuff because they can't measure it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's there, and there have been a lot of studies about the fact that it is there. So rejection sensitive dysphoria is when a person literally has physical and emotional pain surrounding rejection, whether it's real or imagined. This can cause a lot of problems. So first of all, you assume that you're being rejected all the time. It's very difficult to know whether or not you're being rejected because you have a difficult time reading that, because your brain just kicks in with rejection instantly. So it can literally be a stomachache, pain in your chest, rumination about something that you said, well, why did I say that? Why did I say that? They're going to hate me, is continual rumination. And rumination is like you repeatedly think of a negative past event or problem causing you to overthink and just having these intrusive thoughts about that incident. I'll give you an example in my life where I had a little tiny confrontation with a security guard at the library one morning. And he'd gotten a little snippy back, and I felt the rejection, and for hours I could not focus on my work. For hours I could not I couldn't do anything really except for ruminate on the fact that I had made this guy not like me. I literally called the library, had them track down the security guard, and I apologized, and I wanted to make sure that we were okay. It was the only way I could feel better. It was the only way I could move on. Now, somebody might say, that's ridiculous. If you have RSD, you might say, I can so relate to that. The other thing is fixation. So along with rumination, you may have some fixations of being unable to stop thinking about something or someone, or an unusually strong interest in something or someone. So rather than ruminating on an event, a fixation is like when you're thinking about a person or a thing and having a really hard time putting that out of your head. RSD looks like a lot of things. People with RSD can develop throughout their lives feeling like nobody really likes them. They're pretending to like me. My friends don't even really like me. Or they have imposter syndrome where they are like, someday somebody's going to figure out that I'm not that smart. I'm not this good. They're going to figure out that they don't like me, or that I'm not good enough. Along with those feelings of not feeling like we're good enough, and feeling like we're imposters, to make things worse, a lot of times we speak to ourselves in a very negative way. It doesn't matter whether it comes from outside or whether it comes from in here. Negative talk about yourself is negative talk. A person with RSD is rejecting themselves when they give that negative self-talk. And remember, we're having a physical, very negative reaction to something that has made us feel rejected, whether it's real or imagined. I want you to think about that. People can go through the day and have several episodes about RSD, things that other people may not even remember happened, will stay in our heads. And if you've seen my other video, they can hang out in our DMN, our default mode network. You can watch my other video for that. But it hangs out there and it just keeps going, and we ruminate, and it can be debilitating. When we talk about RSD, we talk about how like that person feels inside, and how difficult it is for them to cope with that emotion. What does it look like on the outside? So on the outside, somebody may appear withdrawn or very reserved because they're afraid of saying or doing anything that may cause them to be rejected. Or a person may be very gregarious and very outspoken, and it can look very different in a lot of people. People with RSD often seek reassurance that their relationships are okay. They often want to know what's wrong. Are you mad at me? Why are you mad at me? Just assuming that you are. And that can lead to some problems in relationships. To be honest, it can lead to a lot of problems in relationships. Open communication is about being able to give your partner the advantage of knowing what you need, right? So communicating your needs, them communicating their needs, and sometimes your needs and their needs and what they're doing and you're doing are not lining up, right? So you have to talk about it. What happens when every time you talk about something, a person feels sick to their stomach? They get like a heavy weight on their chest, and they automatically feel as if you are completely rejecting them. Doesn't matter what you've said, doesn't matter what you've asked. If you say, hey, next time when you load the dishwasher, can you put this one on top because they could melt? You've rejected that person. Did you intend to reject that person? No, you intended to give them feedback, right? But to them, that was a rejection, and it hurt, and it's real. So I think one of the things that you could take away from this is, in a relationship, if every time your partner gives you any feedback, you assume that they are criticizing you, communication can stop, because there will be a point at which our partners and our ADHDers, and if God forbid they're both ADHDers who have problems with RSD, assume that every time the other person says something to them, it's a criticism. A lot of people with RSD also have an issue with emotional outbursts that seem a little out of proportion to what's happening. A lot of times it's a defensive mechanism because they felt rejected, and then they just blow up because they have to defend themselves because they want that person to understand why they're not a bad person. That's really hard to see in a spouse when you're having an argument, that they're being defensive because they want you to like them. It doesn't have to be anything major to trigger an RSD event. It's probably part of why a lot of people with ADHD end up divorced, but that's another story. Am I saying that all ADHD marriages fail? No. I'm married to an ADHD man and I have ADHD. Am I saying that it can cause some major issues in a relationship? Absolutely, yes. I also think that if you know about it, then maybe you can address it and really find out what the intention is behind that person's comment before you go into a rejection sensitive episode. There are lots of things that you can learn to do for that, coaching being one of them. There is some new research about medications that may work with RSD, but RSD is kind of a re-emerging piece of knowledge. It's only been like 15, 20 years now that we've been really looking at this again. There are new medications, there's new research, and there's hope for an improvement in this front. But in the meantime, there are some other things that you can do besides taking medication. I always say, if you can't change what you don't understand. So if you understand what RSD is and what it's doing to your brain, because essentially it's playing mind games with you. There are some things that you can try to do that will help with that rejection. One of those things is to don't assume rejection. So a lot of people with RSD, they assume that every time somebody says anything that might be construed as semi-negative is a rejection to them, or looking at them funny, or turning their back at a certain time is all rejection. We know when we feel that feeling. We know what it is. We may not have known that it was called rejection sensitive dysphoria, but we know what it feels like. When that feeling hits, try to stop yourself and think, are there other explanations for this behavior? Did he turn around because he was distracted by somebody else? What else could have happened besides the fact that it had something negative to do with me? That's one thing. The other thing is really start exploring your strengths. Consider asking your friends and your parents about your strengths. Read about them regularly. Start paying attention to the things that you really do well. We know a lot of negative self-talk comes with RSD and ADHD. So the more we can think positive about ourselves, the less rejection we are fighting within ourselves. Get distracted. If you do have an incident where you're having a rejection response and you're debilitated, do something that might distract you but doesn't take a lot of energy on your part, because it's really hard to pull that out of there. So pick one of your really good go-tos, something that you really like to do, to kind of pull you out of that. A lot of times talking to somebody else, especially somebody who understands you, a friend, a family member, your boss, a coworker, somebody, and just explaining where you're at and how you're feeling can be helpful and distracting enough to help bring your episode under control. And then use positive affirmations and mantras. A lot of people roll their eyes. Here we go, positive affirmations. Positive affirmations are just ways of you hearing positive things about yourself over and over again. Doesn't matter who's saying them. They're positive things and they go in your ear and they get processed. The more positive you feel about yourself, the less likely you're going to be to feel rejected at every turn, because you'll have confidence in the fact that you're lovable, and you are lovable. A lot of people with rejection sensitive dysphoria really question whether or not they're lovable. You are. Everybody is. So some takeaways. RSD can be debilitating for people, and it's very real. It can cause problems in relationships and cause people to feel bad about themselves. My hope is that if you have identified this as an issue with you and you're starting to understand yourself a little bit better, that RSD will have less of a hold on your life in the future. ADHD Life Coaching has been known to help with this. If you're interested in chatting with me, you can always sign up for a consultation. Otherwise, if you enjoy my content, smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.